Welcome to the Zen Studies Podcast. Thanks to new supporting members of the podcast. David from Buffalo, New York. Willow from East Lyme, Connecticut. Gretchen from Cranston, Rhode Island. And Julian from Brighton in the UK. And thanks to you if you are an ongoing supporter. You make my work possible. So this is one of my unscripted Q&A episodes, and because I answer fairly extemporaneously, I may not fully address a question. I like to be very thorough. I hope that comes across in my other episodes. So there's always part of me that would rather not do a fairly extemporaneous episode, even though I regularly give Dharma talks at my Zen center. I worry that I may forget to talk about something important or, leave out something essential. So please feel free to email me through the podcast website if you have any comments or questions or, additions to what I'm talking about. So I'll answer 3 questions today. I'm calling this episode Comfort in the Precepts, Anger at Injustice, and Accidental Kensho. So first, finding comfort in the precepts. Steve wrote, how do you find comfort in the precepts? Truth is not always warm and inviting. Sometimes the truth is cold and harsh, no matter how it's delivered to you or how you dispense it to someone. Right speech can still hurt. Right action can seem like a betrayal. It's fine when we all gather at a Zen center and uphold precepts and sit in meditation. But out in the rest of the world, following precepts can leave you alone and misunderstood. How do you find comfort in the precepts? So for the sake of anyone who's listening who doesn't know what we're talking about when it comes to precepts, these are the moral guidelines that are part of Zen. They include precepts against killing, stealing, misusing relationships, lying, abusing intoxicants, dwelling on the past mistakes of self and other, building yourself up by denigrating others, stinginess, indulging anger, and defaming the 3 treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I have numerous episodes on the precepts. So, comfort in the precepts. It's interesting to think about what comfort might mean. I think of the precepts as being pretty challenging. As soon as we lay them out as an aspiration, as soon as we claim them as an aspiration, or actually any other moral code, they become a mirror or a context for our behavior. What in any other circumstance might have just been a momentary indulgence of desire or a judgment call, with the precept behind it, we end up having to examine our behavior more deeply. Or not about having to, it's just in contrast with the precept, it will just come unbidden to mind. What if we're lying, for example, and we have in the back of our mind that we have promised not to lie? Precepts are also kind of puzzles. How do we honor a precept in a given situation? They give us a direction, a general direction to go, but they don't give us any details. So sometimes it can be very challenging to know what would be compassionate. An example is little white lies to save people's feelings. Is that an act of compassion? Is that our way of trying to get out of being honest or suffering the consequences of our actions or whatever? So they're puzzles. Oftentimes we have to compromise in order to keep one precept. We kind of have to bend another. We may break them out of compassion. We may, for instance, euthanize an animal, and that seems to be, morally acceptable to most of us. Actually, it's an act of compassion, but we are still breaking a precept. So, when does that become dishonest? When are we not being honest with ourselves and we're actually doing something selfish? I don't know. Like when in terms of diet, and, I sometimes eat meat because, people have cooked it for me. Somebody's made me a meal, and I just personally want to accept that gift. And yet maybe I'm just making excuses because I like the flavor. So, and then of course we also have the challenge of outcomes, because we may have an intention when we decide how to act in order to act in accord with a precept, and the outcome may be very different. Maybe we've tried to do something generous, but it's not perceived that way, and actually, seems to have some negative repercussions. But I think what Steve might be getting at is not so much about these precept challenges, but this sense of being kind of lonely out in the world when you are trying to live according to the precepts, and you're surrounded by people who generally are not. Now, most people, have some vague aspirations to be nice or kind or perhaps generous or not lie. But a lot of times when aspirations are they're not given form, right? They're not actually reduced to a moral code that you have vowed to keep, then it's a little easier for things to get muddy. So when we are out in the world and we refuse, for example, to cheat or steal, even when it's something kind of subtle or only hurts some big corporation, if the people around us are kind of through peer pressure encouraging us to cheat on our timesheet or borrow things from our workplace, or just go ahead and avail ourselves of some kind of streaming subscription, even though, it's somebody else's account, or I don't know. And I'm not saying, it's kind of up to each person. You need to be honest with yourself about how you're keeping the precepts, how you're going to choose to keep the precepts. But if we really we have taken this vow not to steal, not to lie, and then we don't want to do that, it can put us out of sync with the people around us, and they may kind of think we're crazy, frankly, that we would, keep some kind of moral code for its own sake, even when it's something kind of subtle or something we could easily get away with. We may refuse to lie in any form, even when our job or our legal situation or social circumstances are more or less asking us to or expecting us to. There are many situations we may find ourselves in the world where the situation persists in a way because everyone just kind of lies or fudges their situation in order to get through it. I mean, an example I have is I got in a small car accident where somebody ran a red and hit my car, and it was up to my word against his as to who ran the red light, because we didn't get any witnesses. And when he went to his insurance claim, he said that he was not at fault. And I can imagine that, his insurance company was encouraging him not to be honest. And I probably would have, similarly, if I had run the red, I probably would have been pressured in the same way to not admit fault. But I don't know. Depends on one's financial or legal circumstances, but I probably would have admitted fault even if my insurance company had been pressuring me not to. And probably most of the people around me would have thought that was kind of odd. We may refuse to overindulge in alcohol or drugs or other kinds of behaviors, even though the people around us see it as a way to bond or enjoy themselves. And that can provide some or cause some tension between us and other people. They often may feel like we are withdrawing from them or judging them or making them kind of self-conscious about their own behavior. So it can be tricky. And then, of course, there's the classic of refusing to gossip about other people at work or elsewhere, even though other people want to. And this is often kind of a bonding social experience where we want to agree that some other person or group of people are terrible, and we ally together against them. But if we refuse to do this, it can make people feel, again, kind of awkward or judged or something like that. So it's tricky to find ways to connect with people and alternative ways to connect with people. We may also want to be generous with our resources, even if our family doesn't fully support it. Family members or spouses or whatever may feel kind of jealous in a way of the time or resources that we are giving elsewhere. So I don't know. I don't know that precepts are meant to provide comfort, but I would say the comfort that I derive from the precepts is, I guess it's not so much in the precepts themselves, but in the truth of interdependence that they reflect. So at one point in my practice, I was really in kind of a bleak place, and I doubted myself, and I doubted many aspects of our practice and the world, and the only thing I could think of that I knew was true were the precepts. I knew that if I acted thoughtlessly, taking life or stealing, misusing relationships, lying, that I would create suffering for self and other, and that was a reflection of the fact that I am not actually separate from anyone or anything. So I take comfort in that. Also, I would say living according to the precepts, it can be much easier if we are doing that with the support of Sangha. So that's, we come together in Sangha, we share the challenges of trying to live according to the precepts in the rest of our lives, and we speak about creative ways to try to do that and support one another in that effort. All right. On to the next question. The relationship between anger, forgiveness, and injustice. So a concerned mother wrote, I'd appreciate it if you could explore the relationship between anger, forgiveness, and justice. I'm carrying profound anger toward a relative who sexually assaulted my daughter when she was about 8. A young adult now, my daughter suffers from physical and mental illnesses that stem in part from this trauma. The perpetrator of violence was also a minor at the time, and I'm still very angry at his parents. I'm also angry with myself for not protecting her. I'm not in accord with the precept against anger and do not have a peaceful mind around this matter. I need to address it. However, I can't believe that I'm contriving reality for the self. It happened, there were witnesses, and almost 2 decades on, my daughter suffers like so many other victims of sexual and gender-based violence. I can bury the rage, but that's not skillful. Thoughts? So this person quotes contriving reality for the self, which is from our text on the moral precepts. So in terms of anger, we say, do not contrive reality for the self. So this is a very tricky and complex question, which probably deserves, full treatment in a full, well-thought, planned episode. But I will give it a response. One way to look at this is that anger is not so much a problem as our attachment to anger. So anger, as many people will have heard, phrased by different Buddhist teachers, anger is something that arises in us when we think something needs protecting. Ourselves, our loved ones, something else. So the anger arises as a way to motivate us to, fight or flee. And it's in many ways natural and appropriate. However, it arises in the moment in response to something that's actually happening. So when there are things in the past or things perhaps that are outside of our realm of direct experience and direct ability to relate to or affect, then when we still feel anger, it means in a way that we have, we say it's indulge anger. So that's the precept, is do not indulge anger, do not feel angry, because anger just arises naturally. So what does it mean to indulge it? Then that's where the contrived reality part comes, where we weave a narrative about what happened and our role in it, or somebody else's role in it, or who was hurt, etc. And it may very well have a grounding in reality, like our questioner said. But why are we doing this? Why are we kind of holding on to, fueling, nurturing, dwelling on our anger? And in many ways, I think this is like a trauma response. Something negative happens, and we keep on protecting ourselves as if the threat is always around. And it's out of sync with the truth of our current circumstances. The trauma response will come on when we are actually we're not under threat the way that our traumatic experience, where we experience the trauma. So we end up nurturing this anger, holding on to this narrative because we think we need to protect ourselves. Because this violation happened, that we need to build up our defenses. And part of our defenses is, holding on to that feeling of needing to protect, holding on to the whole bunch of it. But if we are grounded in the present, usually we are not under threat, and or our sphere of influence, things that we can do about this, it's not immediately available. So there's really no action that is required in the moment. And yet we still kind of hold on to our anger. So letting go of attachment to anger, what is this like? Why do we do this? So it's important to remember that when we let go of our anger, which is not at all easy, it has nothing to do with the other person. We think that holding on to our anger will somehow hold the other person accountable, will prevent them from causing harm, will, prevent them from getting away with something. And yet, in reality, what we are dwelling on inside generally has no effect on the other person. They usually don't even know that we are still feeling miserable with anger. Our internal feelings are not a check on their behavior. They do not require the person to be accountable. So what we're talking about is an internal letting go, which has nothing to do with the other person. Sometimes this is phrased as forgiveness. And if that term works for you, that's fine. But I think what we're really getting at is looking within and refusing to allow this other person, these other people, or maybe even our past self who made a mistake, refusing to allow them or the past situation to continue to torment us. When I think of it like this, it feels empowering, even kind of defiant and positive. So there's a situation where we have been hurt or someone we love has been hurt. We witness this. The urge to protect arises. The anger arises. We take action if there's something that needs to be addressed in the moment. But then we try to let that emotion just pass through us. Particularly if no action needs to be taken. No, we don't need the energy of anger to do anything right now. We can let the emotion pass through. And when we do this, it doesn't have to be, there's no denial involved. That's just kind of suppression. In fact, in order to let the emotion pass through, we actually have to develop a certain level of acceptance. Acceptance that this thing or these things happened, or that they are happening right now and there is nothing that we can do about them. So that acceptance, letting go of just the internal resistance to this being as it is. That's when we can let the emotion pass through, which leaves us perfectly capable of taking appropriate action, of keeping appropriate boundaries. That internal resistance and outrage that we hold on to, we hope it's going to have an external effect, but what is usually is only affects us. It takes energy. It leads to tension in the body. It leads to a clouding of judgment. So when we are able to let it go to whatever extent, there's a lot of clarity and energy can be released. But this is internal work. We don't do this by sheer force of will. It means becoming very intimate with and familiar with our anger, but also also cultivating that determination to refuse to continue to be tormented. And we only can let go when we're ready. And therefore, just like all other aspects of our practice, we need to do our own practice and be patient with ourselves. And we definitely should not be preaching to others about where they should be with respect to things. I mean, the opportunity that you have to suggest to someone else that you love that maybe they should work on letting go, maybe you're going to get a moment where you can hint at that gently. Or maybe you can just demonstrate it for someone else. But it definitely is not skillful to preach to others about that. So, moving on to the third and final question. Accidental Kensho. Dramatic and sometimes unpleasant openings. So Philip wrote, "Hello. I'm wondering about your thoughts around anxiety that occurs when one has insights or perhaps Kensho when not pursuing it or expecting it. As an example, I've been having abrupt insights while not even practicing currently. I did so more in my early 20s, about 25 years ago. The result is fairly intense anxiety as I quote-unquote see my true nature and how all my language, core thoughts and constructs and ego melt away. It's a bit terrifying. I guess what's most surprising about the experience is that it's not calming and fulfilling like we usually hear. There's no equanimity, rather panic." So I decided to include the word Kensho in the, tagline for this section and in the title for this episode, in part to just kind of capture people's attention because a fair number of people know what that is or have some idea what it's supposed to be. And what it's generally supposed to be, not that it's a simple thing, is awakening to your true nature. So this is believed to be a very pivotal experience in Zen. And I've talked about it a lot on the podcast and will continue to do so in my next episode on realization. But I don't really like to use the term Kensho because I don't know that it's helpful to label the insights we have into our self-nature. Kensho, at least in my lineage, and I'm not saying that this was what Philip was talking about, but Kensho in my lineage is generally reserved for, maybe it is kind of what Philip's talking about, but it's reserved for very dramatic and disruptive experiences that people have. Sometimes they're not, completely disruptive of your life, but they require a lot of care from a teacher and from a sangha. Many of us, our insights into our self-nature, they come just a little bit at a time. We just have a little bit of an opening here, a little bit of an opening there. And as my teacher Kyogen Carlson would say, it's like the lotus gradually opening. So it leads to the same place. But it's much easier to integrate little shifts in perspective. Wow. And then you kind of work with that and live with that and sit with that. Oh, okay. And then maybe you get another insight. But sometimes it's not really, it might be a little dramatic to call it a mental break, but it's a big enough shift in perspective that people are really left needing some grounding and support and some context for it, and it can be very dramatic. So we usually reserve the term for that just because it is such a special situation that we need to pay attention to. But whatever, small, big, medium openings. Philip is talking about openings that are rather disruptive and disconcerting and disorienting. And these can happen to anybody. As Philip is saying, he's not really practicing right now, but he did before. But openings can happen to anyone, whether they practice Buddhism or another spiritual path or no path at all. After all, we all have the same kind of self-nature. So anybody can have an experience of a perspective shift that helps them see that, or part of that. Helps you see that everything you think is true is like a dream. And these shifts, they may be shocking and disorienting, but they are only half of the picture. So Philip was talking about how, these openings, seeing your true nature is supposed to be calming and fulfilling, but why is this, in a sense, there's only panic about this kind of, whoa, everything is empty, where am I? But it's only half of the picture, that kind of recognition that everything you thought was true is like a dream, right? That the kind of unreality of everything you've been relying on. Because you also are. After all, who realizes you are empty? Who experiences the anxiety? We are not who we think we are, but we are not trying to destroy the self. We're trying to transcend it, to see how it is actually boundaryless, that the self is not separate from all being. So there's a sense of what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. So when we recognize that emptiness of self, that what we thought was there is not there, then we are invited to look deeper, to kind of let go and see what catches us. I think of this sometimes as, we're in water, and it is possible to drown in water, and we've been holding on to something, and this is like attachment to our idea of self. And when that's taken away, there we are, kind of panicked and potentially drowning. But if we can relax and open up to what is true, we find that we are actually being supported, that we can float. And this takes trust and care of self. So there are ways that trauma and mental illness and various other things can destroy our sense of self in a negative way. And we are left without a sense of boundaries. We're left without a sense of who we are and how to take care of ourselves. We completely disoriented. I mean, our sense of self is healthy. It's also, can be a tricky problem, but it's healthy. It's part of us. So we're not trying to destroy that. So oftentimes when our sense of self kind of disintegrates, when we have something of an opening, I'm not saying this is the case with Philip, but sometimes it means we have work to do on taking care of, on healing the self. This may involve karma work, psychological therapy, work with a teacher, whatever, facing past traumas. Sometimes it might even involve medication. Just, we need to take care of this self before we can transcend it safely. So ideally, If you are someone who experiences this kind of disorienting or exciting or whatever dramatic openings, you should talk about them with a teacher. They can provide context, reassurance, encouragement to look deeper or notice what you've missed. But be aware that really the best thing to do is to ground yourself in some kind of practice and community. Ground yourself in practice and Sangha, because most teachers, maybe some amazing Zen masters, have the ability to just look at you and diagnose what's up. But most of us are just human beings, and we need to know you. We need to have seen your practice. We need to have some kind of relationship with you before we know what's going on, before we know how significant this opening is, and what you might have missed. So I just encourage anyone who's having dramatic openings to practice, to connect in a real way with a teacher. And in terms of the kind of panic, I've heard analogy as you are approaching the truth, especially the truth of your own self-nature, which can be perhaps disorienting. It's like you're going to go swim in the ocean, and the ocean's really cold. And you're going up to the water, and you just get your toes wet, and it's too cold, and you back away. And then you go in a little further. And it may take quite a while before you are used to it and you are willing to let the water take you and to swim. So it can take a while, and we can be patient with ourselves in terms of our sense of panic, in terms of our sense of discomfort. And in a way, it's those of us who have very slowly opening lotuses. I kind of like to think that we have very healthy brains. We have very healthy minds that only let us taste just a little bit, and then the mind says, okay, that's enough. And then we need to integrate that, and then at some point maybe we get to see a little bit more. So if you don't experience dramatic openings, I encourage you not to envy people who do. They're just different ways of coming into deeper relationship with the truth. And one is not better than the other, and we don't get to decide what our own experience is going to be. So with that, I will call it the end and be back soon with another episode. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening.